Hello and welcome. I'm Leanne Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. President Trump welcomes Netanyahu to the White House as tensions between the US and Iran continue to rise. 10 people, including the shooter, are dead in Canada's British Columbia after an attacker opened fire at a local high school. And police release a man held in connection to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance as the hunt continues for the mother of news anchor Savannah Guthrie. President Trump is hosting Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House today as tensions continue over Iran's nuclear weapons program. Netanyahu is expected to encourage Trump to make a deal that would rein in Iran's uranium enrichment, as well as its support for its proxy groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran, meanwhile, has said it will not limit its uranium enrichment, whilst Western sanctions continue to strain its economy. Speaking earlier today on Fox News, Donald Trump said Iran would be foolish not to make a deal. Take a listen.
As you know, we have a massive flotilla right now going over to Iran. We'll see what happens. I think they want to make a deal. I think they'd be foolish if they didn't. We took out their nuclear power last time, and we'll have to see if we take out more this time. They want to make a deal. They wouldn't talk to anybody else, but they're talking to me. But, you know, it's a good question. A lot of people say no, and I would say that I'd rather make a deal. It's got to be a good deal. No nuclear weapons, no missiles, no this, no that, all the different things that you want. But some people worry that they've been very dishonest with us over the years, right? Very dishonest.
For more on this, I'm joined from Tel Aviv by former Israeli government spokesperson Eylon Levy. Eylon, as always, good to have you on the show. This is the 7th meeting between Netanyahu and Trump in just over a year. What concrete outcomes is Israel seeking from this visit, particularly regarding Iran?
Israel and the United States are really very closely aligned on the major threat coming from the Islamic Republic in 4 areas. Firstly, the nuclear program. Secondly, ballistic missiles. Third, the support for proxy armies around the region like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. And of course, the horrible repression of the Iranian people and massacre of the protesters there. So I think Israel wants to ensure that the Iranian regime doesn't get a chance now to rebuild its nuclear weapons program, rebuild its ballistic missiles, and get back to the position of strength it had before the Iranian Axis launched the October 7th war, when it was able to sow terror throughout the Middle East. The decision will, in the end, be Donald Trump's, how he wants to proceed in terms of the American interest. But I dare say Israel will have a lot of intelligence that it can share with the United States so it can make that decision how to tackle the Iranian threat.
And Trump has said no nuclear weapons, no missiles, and is reportedly considering deploying a second carrier to the region. Is Israel pushing for a stronger military deterrent against Iran, or is it confident diplomacy and sanctions are enough at this stage?
Israel is pushing to make sure the Iranian regime cannot get nuclear weapons or ballistic missiles, because that would be an existential threat to Israel and a major threat to the United States and its allies in the region. But of course, the threat of deterrence and diplomacy go hand in hand. It is President Trump's gunboat diplomacy that is giving the Iranian regime a reason to negotiate, rather than continuing to furrow what little money it has into rebuilding its ballistic missiles at the expense of the Iranian people. So obviously everyone wants to see a diplomatic solution. Israelis do not want to run back into bomb shelters like we did during the 12-day war with Iran, when ballistic missiles were raining on Tel Aviv and other cities. But in order for there to be diplomacy that forces the Iranians to agree to a deal, they really don't want to at the moment. That's why the US has that big military presence in the region, to tell the Iranians, you know, given these circumstances, you would really be foolish to go down this plan of regional aggression again.
And Eylon, Israel's recent steps in the West Bank have drawn international criticism. Could these policies create tension between Netanyahu and Trump during today's discussions?
I think President Trump and Netanyahu are fully aligned on the need to tackle the Iranian threat. They both understand that that is the biggest threat to regional security, and that is their priority. As for Israel's recent moves in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, the Knesset, or the cabinet, made a decision that overturned a racist Jordanian-era land law that made it an offense to sell land to anyone who is not an Arab. That law was passed by the Jordanians following their illegal occupation in 1948, an occupation that even the Arab League condemned. And Israel is now making the land registration process there more transparent and removing that nationality restriction on who can buy land. But I think President Trump and Israel remain firmly aligned on the need to prevent the Iranian regime from getting nuclear weapons, continuing to fund its proxy forces and ballistic missiles, of course, which are the major threat to both countries.
Do you think they remain aligned on what's happening in the West Bank?
I think it's natural that there will be differences of opinion between the American administration and the Israeli government, but they remain aligned on what the major threat to the Middle East is, and that is that the Iranian regime that is down, licking its wounds, seriously wounded after the October 7th war backfired in its face, will try to rebuild its terrorist forces around the region, will try to rebuild its nuclear weapons program and ballistic missiles, and that will destabilize the Middle East, just as there is a real opportunity now to move towards peace and normalization, because that big obstacle of Iranian aggression has been removed and needs to be kept down.
The UN warns Israel's West Bank settlement plans could be illegal annexation. How does Israel respond to this? Because you're talking to me about regional stability, and this doesn't seem to be creating it right now.
Israel's response would be that it is wrong to have a Jordanian-era law that restricts land sales against foreigners. That is racist. The Jordanian occupation after 1948 was an illegal occupation. They used that occupation to pass a racist law that restricted land sales to Arabs. And Israel is now removing that racist restriction to make it more transparent who can purchase land in that region. I think Israel would respond that the big obstacle to regional stability is not whether Israelis are able to build homes in Judea and Samaria, but if the Iranian regime is able to fill Judea and Samaria with rockets, with drones, with the guns it's been trying to smuggle through Jordan, and to use that territory as a launch pad for war against Israel, just as it flooded Gaza with weapons against Israel before October 7th.
And Eylon, let's just have one final closing thought on this meeting between Netanyahu and Donald Trump that is happening as we speak. They've met each other at the White House. As I said, President Trump is considering sending a second aircraft carrier to the region if nuclear talks with Tehran falter. How confident are you that there will be a resolution and we won't see military action?
I'm not confident that the Iranian regime is going to agree to a diplomatic deal that will halt its nuclear program, ballistic missiles, and support for its proxy forces around the region. Those three pillars that have destabilized the Middle East have been central pillars of Iranian strategy, and they've said repeatedly they're not going to give up those ballistic missiles. And they're not giving up support for the proxy forces, even when protesters inside Iran are crying, "My blood is for Iran, not for Gaza and not for Lebanon." So unfortunately, I think there is a very real risk that negotiations will collapse and President Trump will choose to use the military option, although I hope that the Iranian regime will come to its senses and stop those destabilizing activities.
Eylon Levy, as always, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Liam.
Let's get into this further with former Iranian-American official Landon Yazdian. Thank you so much for joining me, Landon. Great to have you on the show. Iran has warned that Israel's involvement could undermine the US-Iran dialogue. Do you think Netanyahu's presence at the White House could complicate these diplomatic efforts that are ongoing?
I think Netanyahu's meeting with President Trump can certainly influence his decision, as there is intelligence sharing between the two governments. And also, I think there is an agreement in Washington and in Tel Aviv that the situation in Iran warrants further action of some sort, be it diplomatic or kinetic. As such, I believe Mr. Netanyahu coming to the United States, meeting with President Trump, can certainly influence the next steps.
And what do the ongoing anti-government chants, despite a deadly crackdown, reveal about public sentiment towards the government in Iran?
This is a very good question, as I see that the Western media has not paid enough attention to this, what's happening inside Iran. It's very, very deep, and it's not dead yet, as some media reports say. People in Iran are chanting against repression, against the influence of proxies such as Hamas and Hezbollah. And also, they are chanting for the return of the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. Now, this is like, this has caught a lot of people by surprise, as a lot of people did not expect this to happen, and did not expect this to happen in this scope. And as there are like millions have come to the streets chanting for those. So I believe when negotiating, and this is the reason why the United States Armada is in the Middle East in the first place, as the president has said that he will help the Iranian people, said help is on the way. So after tens of thousands are getting killed in the streets, massacred basically, the people are expecting some kind of assistance. However, I believe that this is not the end of it. In the streets, from everything we have seen, this is like going to happen again. And as such, if a mass killing happens again, like happened in Syria during President Obama's 2012 promise to assist the opposition, and nothing happens from the American side, that this could absolutely complicate America's standing and the scope of negotiations with the Iranian side.
And it's really interesting because you just said to me that Donald Trump did send out that truth social message when there were those anti-government protests in Iran saying help is on its way. The help never came. Yes, there has been a military buildup, a substantial one that is happening in and around Iran. And I just wonder, what do you think at the moment? Do you think that if these talks fail, conflict is likely to happen?
I do. The likelihood of a kinetic action, potential kinetic action by the United States is very high in my view. I believe that just today, several Iranian officials have said that they will only negotiate on the nuclear parameters and nothing further. And as we know, the United States Secretary Rubio has said that the United States is looking for more comprehensive negotiations in scope. And as such, I believe that if the negotiations fail, that there is a likelihood for kinetic action.
And it's really interesting because I think a lot of people are wondering, is Netanyahu coming to Washington to align strategy or to persuade President Trump to adopt a tougher line towards Iran? And that's something you're just picking up with Marco Rubio. How do you think that will go down in Tehran? And do you think a tougher line will work at all?
Because of the post-revolutionary system in Iran, and because of the rigid ideological system that is currently in place, I believe there is very little room for compromise on behalf of the Iranian regime. And as such, I am not certain if the Iranian government is willing and ready to let go of some of the notions that it has held on to for the past 47 years, meaning the ballistic missile program, the nuclear program, or the support of the proxies. And as such, because Israel sees itself in this existential threat by Iran, is like threatening Israel's existence, that it has always leaned on the tougher action against Iran. And I believe that people in Washington are aware of that. And I believe that the Iranian government is also aware of that. And that's why we see this shuttle diplomacy of Mr. Larijani going to Qatar and Oman today.
And part of President Trump's Gaza plan hints at an eventual Palestinian statehood, a position Netanyahu has actually long resisted. Do you think this could be a source of tension during the talks between the two leaders today?
I believe they are on the same page, but maybe different methods. I think that the Middle East and even the Americans are war fatigued, in a sense that they do not want to continue with the conflict in Gaza. Everybody and Israel's neighbors want to bring this to an end in some way. And as such, I believe that Washington and Tel Aviv are trying their best to go to the next phase, which is probably disarming Hamas at this point, because the longer Hamas stays armed, the longer the conflict will continue. And as such, I would think that including the Arab nations in the region that would help this process move forward in Washington.
Ladan Yazdian, thank you so much for joining me. It's been brilliant to have your analysis.
Thank you.
Nine people are dead and at least 25 are injured after a shooting in British Columbia in Western Canada. 6 victims were found inside Tumbler Ridge Secondary School, whilst others died nearby. Police are currently investigating the motive of the attacker, whose body was also found at the school. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney appeared tearful earlier as he spoke to reporters. Take a listen.
Very difficult day for the nation this morning. Parents, grandparents, sisters, brothers in Tumbler Ridge will wake up without someone they love. The nation mourns with you. Canada stands by you. I want to thank and pass on a number of world leaders who've reached out directly to me in solidarity and compassion.
We can now go live to our correspondent, Sarah Firth. Sarah, great to have you on the show. We just saw there, very tearful, Mark Carney, the nation mourns with you, an emotional update from the country's Prime Minister. What more do we know about the shooting? And what are police saying about the number of dead and injured?
Yes, Leanne, a very visibly emotional Prime Minister Mark Carney there speaking about what Canada is now confronting. It's being described as one of the worst mass shootings in the country's history. And just to give viewers a little bit of context, this area of British Columbia is quite a remote region in the foot of the Rocky Mountains. It's got a population, it's estimated around 2,400 people. So this is really personal. We've heard from the authorities on the ground. We've heard from the local mayor saying, look, I don't call them residents, I call these people family. The mayor also saying, I will likely know most of those victims. Leanne, at this point, we're told by authorities there are 10 bodies that have been recovered, 7 at the school, including the shooter. You had 1 person dying on the way to the hospital, and you also had 2 victims recovered at a local residence that it's believed at this point to be connected to the shooting. We've had an update on the ground from the region's premier. We've also heard from the head of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police about the ongoing investigation. I'll just tell you what he said, because this is the latest update on where things stand with the investigation. The head of the police saying, "We believe we have been able to identify the shooter, but for reasons of privacy, we are not releasing information at this point. We're not in a place now to be able to understand why or what motivated this tragedy, but the investigation right now will be focusing on how exactly this came about, and they will, of course, be looking for a motive in this very tragic shooting that's taken place."
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've just heard an update there about the suspected shooter from authorities, Sarah, and we could probably wait to find out what happened. But the shooter was found dead inside the school from an apparent self-inflicted injury. What else have police had to say?
Yes, so we know that in the initial response from the police, which we've been told by authorities was very, very rapid, that they were at the scene within around 2 minutes. An initial police report described the suspected shooter as being a female in a dress with brown hair. Now, authorities have been questioned, but they haven't really elaborated at this point beyond that update from the head of the police. They're saying that, yes, they do think they know the identity now of the suspected shooter. They're not releasing that information yet. Families over the course of the hours in the wake of this shooting, waiting desperately for updates and information as police identify those victims of the shooting. We heard from one of the local pastors who's come out and described what that atmosphere was like, Leanne, in the area where families were waiting. Just absolutely devastating for a small community. Look, Canada as a country is not used to these type of incidents. It's very, very rare that you get a mass shooting of this type. Their gun laws are very, very tight in comparison to here in the United States, where tragically those types of shootings are much more of a common event. So you've got those families and that community, that small community of some 2,400 people just absolutely reeling. The pastor saying, walking through the corridors of that school will never be the same again. We've seen the video emerging of people coming out of that school, many of them with their hands up, many of them students. We've heard from authorities that there is going to be mental health provision on hand for all of that community affected. And really, yet the community, the country in Canada, reeling at the moment, and the international community, of course, sending condolences for this tragic incident that's hit the country.
And Sarah, as you talk to us, we know that it's such a tragic incident. As you say, Canada is not used to mass shootings, and there's been this outpouring of condolences from world leaders. What have they been saying?
Yes, you've heard from the likes of Keir Starmer in the UK. You've heard from French President Emmanuel Macron. Around the world, the leaders are expressing their condolences and solidarity with Canada right now as they try and grapple with the scale of this tragedy. As we said, at this point, it's 10 bodies that police saying that they've recovered, 9 victims. One of those bodies thought to be the suspected shooter. Really, everyone pledging to help in any way that they can, because right now the focus is very much on the support for those families that will have been affected by this tragedy. You heard Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney there. He was saying, look, parents, grandparents, brothers, sisters, they will be waking up to the reality of this in Tumbler Ridge right now, this very, very small community in British Columbia, in a country that is just not used to mass shooting incidents of this kind. The last, Leanne, was back in 2020 in Nova Scotia. And at that point, you then had the country tighten their gun laws even further. So there's going to be a lot of soul searching going on in the days and weeks to come about whether potentially they could go even further, whether or not this tragedy could have been prevented. But as of right now, you've got the families, a community there in Tumbler Ridge grieving, a huge tragedy, at least 25 injured in the hospital right now. We'll be waiting for updates on their condition. And police right now on the ground investigating, trying to find out exactly what motivated such a horrific attack.
Sarah for Earth, thank you so much for joining us. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. At least 4 people are dead, including 3 children, after a Russian airstrike in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv region. A 35-year-old pregnant woman and a 73-year-old lady were also injured in the attack. A 13-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a double stabbing at a school in London. 2 boys in a serious condition after the attack at Kingsbury High School in Brent. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is hosting Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis in Ankara today. The 2 leaders are expected to hold talks about migration and maritime disputes between the 2 countries. And pop singer Britney Spears has sold the rights to her entire music catalogue for an estimated $200 million. Independent music publisher Primary Wave, who made the purchase, also own the rights to Prince and Whitney Houston's estates. Police have released a man detained in connection to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. The 84-year-old mother of US news presenter Savannah Guthrie has been missing for more than a week. The FBI had previously released images and videos of a masked person at Nancy's door. It follows a fresh plea from her daughter. Take a listen.
Law enforcement is working tirelessly around the clock trying to bring her home, trying to find her. She was taken and we don't know where. And we need your help. So I'm coming on just to ask you, not just for your prayers, but no matter where you are, even if you're far from Tucson, if you see anything, if you hear anything, if there's anything at all that seems strange to you, that you report to law enforcement. We are at an hour of desperation.
Let's get the thoughts of former NYPD police officer Darren Portia. Always good to have you on the show, Darren. So police have now released the man they detained in connection with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Does this put investigators back at square one?
Well, I don't want to say it's put them back to square one because they've been introduced an amalgamation of information as it relates to the video, such as the height, weight, the gait. When I say the gait, meaning how this individual walked, the triangulation of the eyes and the nose, which you see on the camera, although this person was wearing a ski mask. In addition to that, there are a series of items that the perpetrator was wearing that can garner attention from investigators, such as the type of shoe that he's wearing, the size of the shoe, the jacket that he's wearing, the authentication of I want to say the straps on the backpack, that backpack being full. I think that there's been a large amount of information that's been presented that takes the investigators far beyond step one. And it's just unfortunate that the wrong person was taken into custody, but I'm confident that a suspect will be taken into custody relatively soon.
And Darren, Nancy Guthrie has been missing now since early on the 1st of February. It is now the 11th of February. Do you believe she's still alive?
Well, I want to speak from the perspective of being hopeful that she is still alive. The unfortunate piece to this is she's a person that's on a series of medications, and there's no evidence to support that she's been in possession of these medications as it relates to being with her captors. Granted, we had a blood trail in front of the house, which reflects the directional path that she was removed. But at the same token, I just think that we always want to maintain a level of hope because we don't know the dynamic of how she's being housed with the kidnappers.
And I think that is a good way to look at it, because obviously her daughter, we did see Savannah, she's been making pleas and calling on people to please help them, and if they see anything unusual, to please come forward. But with the suspect now released and an armed, masked individual that we saw in that FBI footage that was released of the video cam, Darren, it's very chilling footage we see of that person outside Nancy's house. How urgent and concerning is this stage of the investigation, especially to keep everyone else safe?
The urgency began when the perpetrator took Mrs. Guthrie into custody. I shouldn't say custody, took her into under his span of control. So that's where the urgency started. It manifests greater and greater every day moving forward. As you mentioned, we're at 11 days in, and I think law enforcement is vigorously focusing on how they can best take this person into custody. This seems as if it was somewhat of a potentially botched burglary, if you want to refer to that, refer to it as that, because it appears as if the individual that came to the house was somewhat nonchalant in terms of how he came up to the camera, spending an extended period of time in the house. So I'm more of the belief that this is someone that is a burglary, a person that's committed burglaries in the past. So what I think the Tucson police should do in unison with or working or partnership with the FBI is review all complaint reports of burglaries that have happened in that area of Tucson, Arizona, and amass as much information or discovery that can possibly lead you towards an individual that fits the build or the characteristics of the individual that we see in this video. And I think that would be substantive in trying to establish a suspect moving forward.
And let's just talk a little bit about Nancy's health, because you mentioned it to me a little bit earlier on in the interview. She was on medication, she had a pacemaker, and people are asking questions about her medical state right now. We don't know what she has access to, but would her pacemaker be able to identify where she possibly was?
Well, she was wearing an Apple Watch at the time she was abducted, and the Apple Watch had the symbiotic connection between the pacemaker and the watch, and the two entities have been separated. So that's, from what I know, was the key component that can bridge the two entities together. As it relates to a medical device that can possibly track it, I don't have any information, nor has any information been presented that supports that there is a level of a tracking device or GPS on the pacemaker at this point in time.
And with the suspects released, as we've spoken about, and we're now in this situation, Savannah Guthrie's publicly appealing for help, and a $50,000 reward is now on offer. And that's something that people have been talking on. But what specific information are investigators urging the public to come forward with right now?
Investigators are urging the public to come forth with information. You don't have to have the complete comprehensive picture, but something that stands out to you, such as a vehicle that may have been at the location, information that you received from someone else that would support that there was a propensity for a violent act such as we see on this video that's been committed. When we speak to the Bitcoin, as you mentioned earlier, there's been a note that's since been introduced which states that the individual that presented this this note has information as it relates to who the assailant is, and that person that wrote this note wants one Bitcoin, which runs somewhat consistent with the $50,000 range as a reward, in providing, if they provide the information to law enforcement or the authorities to take Nancy back into custody.
And what do you think of those notes that have been written to the family? Because there's been lots of questions around them. If it's actually from the person, you thought it could have been a botched burglary. Some people are saying that those notes are just basically chances from the public domain.
Well, whenever there's a letter that's brought to law enforcement as it relates to a kidnapping, the first thing that you want to do is establish proof of life. There needs to be specific information in this letter that supports the fact that these individuals in question, and I'm referring to the kidnappers, do actually have the victim, such as what she was wearing, information that has not been presented to the public. That can now establish what we refer to as a corroboration that this individual does have a connection. There was a second note that was also presented, and my understanding is they're being somewhat tight-lipped, but at the same token, there has been corroborating information as it relates to these letters that have been presented. And it's somewhat ironic and strange because traditionally kidnappers will approach either the family members or law enforcement with a series of demands. I've never seen it go to media outlets such as TMZ or the Tucson local reporting agency that's been producing content on television. But at the same token, this is what we have. This is the horse that we rode in on. So we need to work as vigorously as possible. But there was 2 deadlines that have passed. The last deadline, which was Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central Time, and there has not been any transaction as it relates to the money that was been established in an alphanumeric Bitcoin account for the $6 million. There has been less than $300 that has been placed into that Bitcoin account, but it's somewhat unknown as to how that money or who placed that money into that account.
Darren, Portia, thank you so much for joining us as always.
Thanks for having me as a guest.
Officials in Cambodia say they have recently shut down around 200 scam centres as part of a major crackdown on transnational fraud. The government is vowing to eradicate all cybercrime networks by April. Patrick Falk reports.
In Cambodia's Kampot province, authorities offer rare access to a scam centre in a bid to show they're tackling operations cheating people out of billions of dollars around the world. Inside this sprawling complex, which sits near Cambodia's border with Vietnam, rooms filled with rows of computer stations and desks strewn with documents instructing how to scam Thai victims. On one sheet it reads, "Don't start by asking your name because it may sound too unfriendly."
There are about 190 locations that we have sealed off now. We have also carefully sealed off both the compound and locations that are in the gated housing area, in villagers' houses and condos and so on. There are big cases with 37 people who were arrested during the raids and sentenced by the court.
Cambodian officials have vowed to eradicate all scam centres in the country before the Khmer New Year in April. It follows the arrest of dozens of senior crime figures linked to the centres and after the US indicted a China-born alleged scam kingpin. China then extradited Chen Zi in what was seen as the strongest international move so far against the criminal networks. Though at the Kampot complex, known as My Casino, there were no arrests.
We have only about 1,000 policemen in the entire province, and there are about 300 military policemen. Even with both forces combined, we still can't stop them because there were about 6,000 to 7,000 of them when they left this place.
In recent weeks, thousands of scam workers, many of whom were trafficking victims, confined in brutal conditions, have fled the compounds seeking to return home. Rights group Amnesty International has called it a humanitarian crisis. Cambodia has long played down the existence of scam compounds in the country, but reports show such criminal activity has been rampant. Many critics doubt the latest campaign to crack down on scamming will be effective. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya English.
Let's take a look at the top business news now. Gold prices gained today as the dollar slipped and Treasury yields lowered. Spot gold was 0.5% higher at over $5,000 per ounce. Dubai International Airport remains the world's busiest, with a record 95.2 million passengers passing through its terminals. There's been a 5% increase in tourists last year to 19.6 million. Turning to all the sports news now, and at the Winter Olympics, the United States beat Canada 5-0 in the women's ice hockey, whilst Finland triumphed over Switzerland. The US will play hosts Italy in the last 8. And Spurs head coach Thomas Frank has been sacked after the team suffered their 11th defeat of the season with a 2-1 loss to Newcastle. Tottenham are currently 5 points above the relegation zone. A reminder of our top stories. President Trump welcomes Netanyahu to the White House as tensions between the US and Iran continue to rise. 10 people, including the shooter, are dead in Canada's British Columbia after an attacker opened fire at a local high school. And police release a man held in connection to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance as the hunt continues for the mother of news anchor Savannah Guthrie. That's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on X, and we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for watching.